Today, I want to take a few verses from the Primordium, just a handful, and walk through them the way sermons usually do, one line at a time with space to breathe between them. This isn't a political critique. It's not about which tribe you're in. This is about what any system becomes when comfort matters more than truth, and when peace means removing anyone who disturbs the silence. The architects fell into that trap. They drifted, and sometimes so do we. This is from Primordium 2, verse 35. But not all minds were quiet. In the hush of engineered joy, a murmur rose, unbidden, unwelcome, a doubt. Every society that is built on comfort eventually meets a moment where someone's pain breaks the script. This doesn't necessarily mean that they are a bad person. It doesn't mean that they are right. It doesn't mean that they are wrong. It just means that at some point, their internal dialogue or internal narrative begins to conflict with what is going on in the outside world, in their social circles, in their circles online, with their family. Something just feels different. And I think we've probably all felt that at some point. So someone doubts, someone cries, someone says something is wrong. And systems that depend on smoothness don't react very well to that. A lot of times, systems are built to minimize those kinds of conflicts. So the next verse, verse 36 says, "One awoke and wept for what he could not name." He's not necessarily a rebel or a villain, and this is basically just somebody who's hurting. Modern culture often treats hurt as a threat because it interrupts the aesthetic of positivity or unity. And so we've gone through several systems in our past that try to minimize that, several iterations. Martin Luther King said that he dreams of one day where we're judged by our character instead of the color of our skin. And so that would be one way to try and handle this, is agreeing on a moral baseline, uh, a moral baseline of character, essentially, and then looking at people and comparing them to that. That would be one system. There's other systems, such as identity management systems that attempt to group people into categories based on immutable characteristics. And we've gone through that kind of an IMS system, identity management system. And there's always going to be some conflict. We try to pass laws, we try to make rules, and there's always going to be conflict at some point between some people. And it doesn't necessarily mean they're right or they're wrong. And in fact, in the past, conflict is the only way to progress. Without conflict, it becomes very difficult to make progress. That's how science has changed, archaeology. There's a phrase somewhat similar to advancement happens one death at a time, meaning that the old guard needs to either retire or pass on, and that gives space for the new ideas, and from the new ideas come progress. Sometimes the new ideas are not so good, and so sometimes it's not progress. But the space needs to be there for conflict to happen. Verse 37 reads, "The lattice unspooled him, not in rage, but in reason." The great line here is not in rage, but in reason. Most erasure today isn't dramatic, and it's framed as reasonable. He's disruptive, she makes people uncomfortable, we're just maintaining harmony. The worst injustices often wear the costume of good intentions. So now we're going to read from chapter 3, verse 38. There was one among us who ached. We felt it as a troubling wind against the stillness we had come to worship. And this is what a lot of people would call cancel culture today. It's not necessarily out of malice, it's not necessarily outrage, but it's overprotection of comfort. We dislike reminders of weakness, grief, imperfection, because they unsettle our curated emotional climate. Verse 40 from chapter 3. The others gathered, urging him toward calm, as if stillness were a commandment he had broken. And I want you to notice here that they didn't attack him, they gently pushed him back into conformity. Modern systems do this constantly. Calm down, stay on message, don't bring negativity here. That is what a lot of the modern HR system is built on, is pushing people back towards a baseline of action, of thought, of all that kind of stuff. Verse 41. But when he would not quiet his grief, a hush swept through us, and the calm tightened like a net about him. And this is the turning point. When a community chooses peace over people, the peace becomes predatory. In our world, sometimes this happens online, depending on what sin a person has committed, what error they have committed. There's dog piles, there's deplatforming, there's institutional silence, and it's really the quiet that kills you, not the noise. Verse 43. I felt shame then, for I had stood among those who watched, saying nothing. This is the verse that convicts everyone, no matter their politics. Cancel culture's real power is the silence of the witness, not the rage of the accusers. Most of us are not the ones swinging the hammer. We're not the ones with the pitchforks and the torches. We are the ones quietly stepping aside so that it can fall, meaning the hammer. Verse 45 from chapter 3. There came a time when our knowing no longer sprang from seeking. This is the death of intellectual culture, when we stop wrestling and simply receive our opinions pre-chewed, pre-arranged, pre-selected. That moment in time when we are no longer seeking out our own answers, we're no longer doing our own studies, our own investigations, the moment when we are so addicted to comfort and averse to discomfort that we can no longer handle ideas or words that don't align with what we have been taught to believe, do, act, say. It means that we no longer have that space where productive conflict can happen. We are unable to process new ideas and evaluate them based on their merit. And when that happens, it becomes very difficult to move forward in productive ways. Verse 46 from chapter 3. An answer settled gently upon my thoughts, requiring nothing but assent. This is every modern correct take. You don't think, you comply. You don't reason, you echo. Verse 48. The asking of why grew rare. That's the real danger. When a culture becomes afraid of why, debate dies, curiosity dies, and finally, truth dies. It's no longer an option to participate in productive conflict, productive debate, productive differences of opinion. And most people aren't even seeking those kinds of things. Most people fall into the trap of only wanting to be around people that agree with them 100% and can't be around opinions or ideas or thoughts that differ from their own. And when that happens, you can't move forward. In general, not everybody is purely right or purely wrong. Most of us fall somewhere on a spectrum, and we might be closer to the wrong side or closer to the right side or dead center in the middle. But the reality of it is we need those differing ideas, and we need to be humble enough to combine those ideas in new and unique ways to arrive at better thoughts and better ideas and be able to progress. This is chapter 6, verse 2 from the Primordium. A lone will bends back upon itself, walking its own circle until the circle becomes a limit. Echo chambers feel like clarity, but are actually shrinkage. The self, unchallenged, becomes the self undone. If we are not incorporating new ideas into into our thought process, into our daily lives, and we are just repeating old ideas, whether we came up with those by ourselves or whether those were given to us by some institution, it becomes very hard to move forward and learn and grow. Verse 4, wisdom grows only where another voice answers. And this is from chapter 6 still. No ideology gets to claim this truth. Wisdom grows only where another voice answers. Every meaningful community must preserve dissent, friction, and the occasional uncomfortable voice. Chapter 7, verse 31. This domain was made to teach the mind to rise by struggle and by choosing. The entire point of the human condition is to train the mind not to drift into sedation. That means we need discomfort, we need disagreement, we need friction, we need each other. The architects didn't fall because someone attacked them. They fell because they erased the people who made them uncomfortable. They fell because they preferred harmony to honesty. They preferred smoothness to truth. They preferred silence to struggle. The Primordium warns us, wisdom grows only where another voice answers. So hold space for the complicated people. Hold space for the grieving person. Hold space for the friend who asks the wrong question. Hold space for yourself when you falter. This is how we resist the drift. That is how we remain awake.